we have in this episode with us 3 men who have transitioned into a second career as teachers. And we're going to get their backstory and a little bit of what brought them here, but also what they bring with them into this second vocation as a teacher. So I have with me today Josue Zelaya, who has 20 years experience as a police officer in the Montgomery County Police Department, who is now our 3rd grade teacher. And he's also been a Heights dad for 11 years. We have with us Mark Grannis, who had 30 years of practicing law and is in his 6th year as a logic and history teacher here. And then we have Rob Liotta coming into his 2nd year as a homeroom and science teacher, and after serving 25 years as a flight surgeon, which he'll explain to us what that means. But thanks so much for coming on, guys, today. I really appreciate it.
Having us.
Thanks. Yeah, it's great.
Thanks, Tom.
It's good to be here. So why don't we start with you, Josue? Why don't you tell us what motivated this transition into teaching from being a cop? They seem pretty different to me.
In some ways. At the end of the day, I think it was being first a Heights dad for several years here, getting to know the teachers and, really admiring their craft. And through the years, actually, a lot of the faculties, kind of planted the seed and said, have you ever thought about teaching? And at the time, I was like, no, I'm having fun what I'm doing. But then as that, the time went on, I actually attended the teaching conference that the school hosted.
Nice.
And that even further, watered that seed. And it really got me thinking of, is this really something that I could do? I've seen the benefit of it, with my own sons. And I really appreciated the mission of the school. So that's how I began thinking of the...
So then when it moved concrete, did you talk to your wife and then Colin? Like, how did that go?
I spoke with my wife, and she was ready for me to, not be out on the streets anymore,
Yeah.
The schedule.
Teaching is less dangerous, you're saying, than being
in some ways. Yeah. But yeah, actually, I just, actually the Heights was not the first school that even though I attended the conference here, the Heights was not the first school that I reached out to. I reached out to other schools, and, I just prayed about it, and, whatever doors open, I'll take a good serious look at it, and one did open here. So
that's awesome.
It just made sense since, I knew the community and my boys were here.
Yeah, we're all glad you didn't choose the other school. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Mark, what's your story look like?
So I would say that when each of my kids was in high school, I had this experience of just being so interested in what they were studying. And really, the teenage years turned out to be my favorite years as a parent. Which I know is a little bit unusual. Not everybody thinks that parenting of teenagers is the best, but I thought it was fantastic. And then I also had this experience in my law practice where I did a lot of managing of the practice. And as I got more senior in the practice, I realized how much of the satisfaction I was deriving from helping younger lawyers flourish. I didn't always want to be the guy who was doing the argument. I wanted to help the other people, do the argument or take the deposition or just, be there as a counselor for the people who came in to talk to me. And I thought, wow, I wonder if I would like it even more if I could help even younger people flourish in even more fundamental ways. And so that's when I started thinking about it and talked to Andy Reid here, actually, and he was encouraging and set up some conversations with Alvaro, and my son was here at the time, and again, fortunately, a door opened up.
Nice. That's really cool. Rob, what brought you to us?
Yeah, so I will say my 9th grade biology teacher motivated me so much that it was the first time when I was studying anything that I went home and did the homework and it wasn't work. It was
Nice.
just and we were learning how the body worked and how the liver works, how the pancreas works. And I remember how much he inspired me that it just never left me, and I went and became a physician. And I knew that's what I wanted to do. And I did that And as a physician for the 25 years serving in the Navy, one of the things in medicine is you're always training the person below you. So you're a medical student. If you're a fourth year medical student, you're training the third year. If you're an intern, which is right out of medical school, you're training the fourth year medical student. And in residency, R1, R2, R3, R4, now you're staff attending. And so I realized early on in my career as a physician, I love to teach. And so you're always teaching the person below you. And then being a part of the military, as a leader, you're also an officer going up the ranks. And part of being an officer, I remember the Secretary of Defense saying, your mission is to train the person below you to do what you can do. And if you're not being a leader, if the people below you can't do what you can do. And so I realized my whole vocation had been teaching, being able to do this and passing on this information. And I loved it. I mean, it was the most enjoyable part of, as a radiologist, I look at a film and a lot of times I'm like, oh, I make the diagnosis, I'm helping this patient. But then I'm like, oh, I'm going to keep this image because someone needs to see this. Someone needs to be able to do this in the future. And so I have this huge training file of just cases that I get excited about showing. And I'm like, oh, remember this case? All right, yes, don't miss this, And so I just love that part of teaching.
Yeah, that's funny because as a Latin teacher, I do find myself, I'll obviously read Latin for fun, but you come across a sentence and you immediately think, your excitement is more who you're going to share this with later, like who you're going to show. That's really fun.
Yeah.
So it sounds to me like all of you actually kind of realized you already were teachers, which I think is really fun. Like you all kind of hit this point where you realize that some aspect of your job that you liked, there were guys that did that all day.
Yeah.
That's fun. How, I guess, looking the other way, so now that you're inside the classroom, what skills did you bring into the classroom that you made, especially particularly the unexpected ones where you thought, oh, I'll leave that behind or I'll never use that again. But then it turned out that experience that you had as a cop or a lawyer or a doctor really just came alive in a different way when in a classroom or parental context. Josue, why don't you start us off?
Actually, I think one thing that really helped me was with the mentoring component that the school does. A lot of the times that I would respond to some calls, especially early on when I was actually going to residences, it was a stressful situation sometimes, between parents or even between parents and their kids, right?
Yeah.
So there was a lot of, it was like mentoring going on. You weren't there specifically to try to enforce a law. It was just trying to get to the bottom of the issue and trying to solve the problem with them doing the work themselves. And so that, when you left, you left it in a better situation that, it was when you got there. And I think that's really been a skill set that has come in handy with, even, mentoring the boys on how to treat each other in the classroom or during breaks. Parents that are, maybe at their wit's end because, they want their son to, do a certain task and, they're just fighting an uphill battle.
Right.
So those type of things really have come in play as a teacher.
I didn't think about how we fight fires and fights here, right? But I think as a
literal
cop,
fires.
Yeah, literal fires sometimes. Ask us later. But the sheer breadth of humanity that you ended up seeing, right, prepares you here in a way that what's in the classroom stays a lot tamer than what you get called to as the last resort sort of guy who comes into the room. So you sort of flipped from the last resort to the earlier on the roots, like Mark was looking for, right? Like maybe I can do this, maybe I can help these kids at an even earlier stage. So that's really cool. Mark, what were some things that came into the classroom with you?
I would say the number one thing was the skill of explaining. And please don't be shocked by this, but not all judges are that interested in what the lawyers in front of them are saying, right? And so as a litigator, sometimes I handled litigation matters in front of judges. Sometimes I handled regulatory matters where I was talking directly to a federal regulator or a state regulator or something like that. And in those circumstances, you've really got a very limited amount of time to try and explain something that's very important to you or to your client at least, and to someone who, good chance the person doesn't really care, and you need to make that person care. That's turned out to be a very, very valuable skill in the classroom, is because I come in every day with something. I care a lot about getting the boys to understand, and not all of them care that much about understanding it. You know, so the ability to sort of encapsulate the big idea into as few words as possible and to deliver that message in such a way that people pay attention is probably the number one thing. But I would also say that a lot of times people are interested. They ask you to explain something to them that's been troubling them. That happens in law, and it happens in teaching. And in that circumstance, you are in part an interlocutor who has to figure out what exactly is behind the question, and get good at understanding actively what someone is trying to say to you and what they're trying to ask. And you're also a counselor who has to try and help someone figure out the best way of doing something. That skill also transferred pretty readily into the classroom.
Yeah.
And then finally, I would say as a mediator, at the end of my career, I spent a lot of time doing mediations for cases down in the Superior Court. And you'd walk in there in the morning, and two people would come in, or two. It was usually two cases a day. And you try and get people to find the middle, and finding the middle happens a lot when we study history. It also happens with scuffles or disputes about grades or whatever else it is. There's a lot of human conflict in all over the place, and including schools. And so the ability to navigate those conflicts was another thing that I was happy to bring with me.
That's good. I appreciate you avoiding the low-hanging fruit of the joke about the middle term as a logic teacher.
Thank you. Yeah,
you found that, and then I took that joke away from you.
Yeah.
But that's really intriguing. On your first point, I've had students come into my classroom later, and I'll bring up a point of logic. We're often unpacking an argument or something, and they'll say, "Oh yeah, it's Mr. Grannis made that so clear. I still remember what that is that you're explaining, middle term or what have you." But you always appreciate that when, a year later, or when there's no tests looming anymore, that the clarity was so helpful for the student that they'll bring it up to another teacher. So that was awesome. Thanks, Mark. How about you, Rob, for what you brought into the classroom?
Yeah, I think for me, emotional intelligence and the practice of observation. And a perfect example of that is just being able to read the boys and read the students and what makes them tick. And because you come in thinking, I'm just going to come and pontificate, and they're going to love everything I have to say and take it all in. And you really can't start there. It's you have to know them. And one of the first things with being a physician was the first 3 minutes of a patient encounter, you let the patient talk. Because you just don't start telling them what to do. You have to see where they're at, what their questions are, what are their fears. And it's the same thing with reading the boys, is being able to know them and then see what gets them tick, what makes them tick, and then getting them motivated. And then utilizing that and seeing how, what I'm trying to get across, putting it in terms that's going to excite them. And so I think that was one skill set. And then with the boys having that, but then with their parents and their families. And I remember the first day of conferences last year, I was sitting there going, this is like seeing clinic, and I get this great privilege to really see, and the same privilege I had as a physician, I had with those parents. And that as a teacher, I got that same inner look that a physician gets. And that great privilege, but then the great joy in being able to help and to answer their questions and to work with them and partner with them to get their son or to do, to grow and their aspirations and dreams for them.
Yeah, it's only almost clicking right now, but how your previous positions, you all saw people at a very vulnerable place often, right? But the teacher often sees much the same. It's the whole family and parenting choices, and it's very easy as a parent to feel judged by another teacher. You get the hostility when you guys have seen both sides of parent-teacher conferences, right? So you see it as a parent and you see it as a teacher, but when the vulnerability is leaned into and not leaned away from, that's when the relationship grows the most, and you think wow, we really got somewhere. Like the two of us were really able to help that kid realize what it was. And some of it was just that I was the not dad voice, right? I found so often as effective as a teacher, but I wouldn't have had the perspective if I hadn't heard what dad was seeing, right? If I hadn't seen what dad was seeing, because still it's a little bit like clinic in the classroom where I've only got them 45 minutes a day. There's 20 something of them. It takes a while to get those human relationships going, right? And the homeroom guys have a little bit more of an advantage on us, but those of us who only see our, a larger group and in smaller amounts of time, sometimes it's only the third quarter conference that you're finally having that breakthrough conversation for the kid who, if you just looked at the grades on the paper, you'd be like, is anything going on here? Right. But it's that breakthrough, the human side of it that you can't put on the report card. So that's really cool. Thanks for that perspective, guys. So I wanted to move now into how much does your past profession come up explicitly? So one of the things that I like about being a teacher, one of the things I think Alvaro points out really well to us is that we're a great example of professionalism to our students, right? We come in prepared. We care so much about our students and our craft and our subject that they don't get to see dad do his job every day, right? They don't get to see mom do her job every day. But you guys have a double advantage because you can show them certainly how to be a professional teacher, but you also might plant that seed for, as your biology teacher did, right? For the future doctor or the future lawyer or the future cop. How much does your previous job come up explicitly in the classroom where you tell stories or maybe even see guidance in mentoring? Josue?
Oh, stories come up quite often.
Tell us another story.
Tell us the craziest thing you saw. I definitely tell a lot of stories, and and I always tell them there were a lot of interesting things you get to see, but there was danger, but then a lot of self-growth, right? Things that you never thought you had the capability of doing, but you were tasked to be the one to go into that building, and you learn so much about yourself. Yeah. And I try to tell them that, it's like, it may be intimidating to have the fourth graders come and destroy your fort that you spent all day building, right? And is it worth rebuilding it, right? And so what lessons can you learn from that? And what you could see how, and like you mentioned before, having the advantage of being at such a young grade, you could try to plant those seeds of like, okay, I've kind of been in this situation before where it's unfamiliar to me, but with guidance and some mentoring, I was able to get through that. And I mean, this is only my third year, but I've seen the boys that were my first year, proceed up through the valley and seeing their confidence grow and growing in themselves, confident in themselves and their abilities. I like to interweave the stories of like, I had to do a difficult situation, but I didn't think I would be capable of doing it. I'm sure, they have a lot of those same trepidations. But that growth that you see in the kids, that's one of the things that really even brought me to the teaching vocation.
Yeah, and brings it alive in the classroom in a way where the person standing in front of you lived through those things. I just like, for the young mind, that can't fit in a book, right? It doesn't. Right. Nobody's story is as cool as your stories, right? Because all those other guys are inert to them, right? This guy's standing right in front of them, so that's really cool. Mark?
Well, there's a temptation to think about war stories, right? And certainly those come up. But when guys ask, for example, I have to teach 9/11 as history.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I had a kid in school during that. I mean,
right.
Like it's crazy to think about teaching 9/11 as history, but that's where we are, right? And when I am telling the boys about 9/11 from my own, I'm talking about where I was at the time and what I was doing, and in some of those classes you can hear a pin drop. I mean, it's just fascinating for the boys to get like an eyewitness account. So that has its place. But I would say, honestly, most of the time that the boys are looking for a war story, they're trying to waste time and stall, right? And
High schoolers? Never.
Yeah, and so there aren't that many. Yeah, they say the word anthrax, they think that I'm just going to go off, But no, but the most of the time, I think the real value is something that comes more with experience, that is age, rather than straight out of the profession. In other words, I can say things, and often do say things to the boys like, I used to think X, but the older I get, I've started to think Y.
Right.
Or there was this one time when I was positive that Smith was a no good so-and-so.
Yeah.
And then I found out that Smith is really, where you find out you make assumptions and you're wrong, or where you've changed your mind, or where you've changed your perspective. And I think for the boys, a lot of the value is in seeing the arc of a human life, and how healthy people go about learning and growing, for a long time. They're not going to be done at 18. They're certainly not done at 14. They're not going to be done at 18. They're not going to be done at 25.
Yeah.
There's, I hope I'm not done. I still have high hopes for more. So I think that modeling some of those attitudes and experiences, independent of any interesting story, is part of what you get when you come to the profession as a second vocation.
Yeah, I mean, I just recall in my reading that the cultural baggage is very strong, that the most change occurs in our lives between 0 and 20, and we pretend, I think, to our detriment, that the other decades have less change in them. And I think about the decade I got married, or the decades in which my kids are born, and I'm like, what on earth did somehow I thought this was less change than like puberty and a few high school classes. Like it's really mind boggling, but you do kind of sit there, particularly as a teenager who hasn't observed anything else. And you think, well, this is certainly a wilder ride than childhood was. So, but just letting them know, like, well, buckle up, right? You got some wild rapids still up ahead, and they're, part of the adventure of the river we call life. So giving them that perspective, I think, is really a golden ticket when you can get it. That's really cool. Rob?
Yeah, I think I rely on lots of old experiences, and especially teaching the sciences. Just came to mind, like my first week of teaching, we're teaching Bernoulli's principle, and I'm talking to him about it, and I'm just like, well, wait a second, guys. Last night I used Bernoulli's principle, reading a scan, a patient was having a heart attack, and looking at, I told them all about the principle, and then now the practical application is I helped the surgeons decide, does he need to go to the operating room tonight? Does he need to go to the cath lab to open up those vessels based off of the flow and the pressure that was there? And actually, I said, I give them a report that says, no, the flow is good. And I said, actually, that guy, we didn't actually do any procedure on him. They medically managed him because of my report that said those vessels were open wide enough, based off of Bernoulli's principle. So I love getting to do that. And it's so easy with the sciences and biology, when those questions come up. So I love doing it. And that's what I loved that as a ninth grader. And now I continue to get to do that. So,
right. Wow. Yeah. You said Bernoulli's principle, and I thought you were like flying an airplane or something. I didn't. I mean, it's all flow, right?
Yeah,
but
exactly.
I was taught it as flow of air over an airplane wing.
I
didn't think about
with a tube.
The flipped application, right? Of the water flowing faster through a narrow river than it does through a wide one. Yeah, that's really cool. Thanks. I learned something here. Appreciate that. So I guess I wanted to switch now to some ideas of, regardless of what you teach, what are some of the, this is a harder question to phrase, maybe, what are some of the life lessons that you wanted your students to get and see when they flourish? So Josue, before I hand this to you, I'll say, like, one of your earlier story reminded me, I would say, some of the most gratifying moments where I do feel appreciated as a teacher is when I'm invited to a wedding or an ordination or what have you, of somebody that obviously I taught a long time ago, considering that I was a 7th grade teacher for a long time. And so there's that level of growth where we stayed in contact, we stayed in touch, we became friends. I guess, in what ways do you see you had in the professional world? We often will say there's this distinction of, you have colleagues and you have, people you directly report to, but there's either hierarchies or equalities. there's not an equality in the classroom, right? Where, I mean, particularly when you teach third graders, but even with the high schoolers, there's not an equality, but we're preparing them for equality. So what are some ways that you saw that the transition from the totally professional world, right? You don't deal with minors very much, although I guess as a cop, you probably did. So maybe this parallel is there to, okay, now we've got the next generation in front of us. How is that different? How is that the same than when it was just junior colleagues or senior colleagues?
I don't know if this is answering the question, but what came to mind is not the reputation, but what you're known for. So when I was on the department, there would be coworkers or supervisors that you knew really had the best interest for you, right? There were some coworkers that if there was a certain type of call and they showed up, it's like, I'm going to have to do this on my own, you know? Or I want someone else here with me, so let me call for some more backup. But you really want to be the one that when you show up or you're present, people feel like things are going to be okay. Like you're gonna handle the situation to the best of your ability. And with the boys, I think I try to relate that to them and say, you know, when like, and I said this to my own sons when they were going through school, and I say this to the boys. It's like I don't really expect you to get a perfect grade. You know, that's great if you do, but I want to see the effort. I want to see the fight for that, right? And so I try to tell the boys in my class and my own sons, like, it's about how people are going to view your efforts and how you're growing from them. So that's one thing that came to mind when you brought that up. But I don't know if it answered.
No, I think that's kind of exactly what I was looking for, is that there is so much more potential for growth at this age level. But I have found as a teacher too that you almost have to convince the students that they're capable of the growth we think they're capable of.
Right.
It's a lot more finessed to do with a colleague, right? Because you're on an equal playing field. You don't have the same incentives and constraints. But with a student, you can say, like, no, this isn't your best work. I can expect more of you. And I think that's been powerful. I mean, it's, you know, with great power comes responsibility. But it's powerful to be able to tell a kid he can do better and then have the relationship be strong enough that he knows he can and come back and try harder. So, Mark, what do you think? Has it been different dealing with the minors?
I would say that, you know, my goals for the students are informed by what my goals were as a parent and what I think probably the goal for most parents. I mean, is there anything that we want more than for our children to flourish as adults? I mean, that's what we're preparing them for. And that involves a certain amount of knowledge about themselves and also a certain amount of knowledge about the world. So part of what we do as teachers is we curate the world. We say, look, there's a whole bunch of stuff that people for thousands of years have been figuring out about the world. We're going to curate that for you so that you can start to figure that out and at least know your way around. You know, you don't know all about the Civil War the first time that you do a unit on the Civil War, right? It's not, you know. It's like visiting, you know, doing a layover in a city and saying, "Oh yeah, I've been there." Well, it's not. You don't really know the city yet, right? So part of it is that, you know, the knowledge about the world, but part of it is also knowledge about themselves. There are going to be some things that they're good at, some things that they're not good at, some things they need to work on, and always they need to know that there's a bunch out there that they don't know that they don't know. And so some you know, those intellectual habits of humility and charity toward others, you know, I think are important to instill as well. But you know, they all need to understand that the world needs them, and that they have a job to do, and that other people are going to be relying on them, and they have to be reliable. So I think, you know, you want to encourage everyone to do his best and to find his place in the wider plan.
Nice. Yeah, that's really good. It's a powerful encapsulation of what we're doing here every day.
Yeah.
Rob?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the great gift of being a teacher is because when I had medical students or residents or interns or fellows, they're already more set, but they're moldable, and so being able to mold them and to just grasp on these big general ideas of like being men of character, people that can be trusted, and that what, it's okay to be nervous and express, hey, I'm nervous about this, but you go at it and you're courageous in doing things,
right.
And you're trying your best and you're doing it honestly, and it will pay off, and then you're the guy that you want to call to the scene, right? And you're like, you want to be that coworker, you want to be that employee. So many times I'll say that, a lot of times I'll say, what if I was your boss, I would fire you for that, it's like,
yeah.
I want you to be the last guy to fire, I want you to be the last guy, because they're like, we do not want to lose you. And so and that's the beauty of being able to teach, and to really have that effect on these big principles of life,
Yeah. It seems like, so for all of you, really, the parenting was the thing that first put one foot in the classroom, right, before you brought both. So what would be your advice to a parent who's listening to this podcast and maybe thinking about it too, right? Like, it was scary. You could have easily stayed where you were doing what you were doing. You were already literally professionals with decades of experience at it. But what would you say to somebody with decades of experience who feels a similar call to what you did into the classroom? Josue?
Honestly, for me, it was just prayer. I know that doesn't translate to the secular world, but just praying on God's providence, and things ultimately became clear that this was where he was asking me to go, and then but logistically, you have to have a conversation with your spouse and your kids, and it's like this is really going to change, and either the amount of time that it's going to take, or financially, and expectations from the family that's going to change. So it's just an open conversation with those that are already in the field, that have been doing it for several years. And it's like, oh, how did you manage this? Having a family and expenses, and I mean, it is a very, at least for me, I've been doing my line of work for so long. It's like, this is something so new, different than, in some ways of what I've been doing. So a lot of guidance from those that are already in the profession really helped me make the transition. It's like, these are the steps you can take to make the transition easier.
Yeah, that's good. But it is, it's a leap of faith, I think, that you all took, because it's going to look different for everybody.
Right.
Like, each of you kind of leapt from a different place. Mark, what would your advice be?
Well, I think with any second vocation, teaching included, you've got to take account of the fact that you have had an earlier vocation and certain commitments have been made. Like, if my second vocation were to the priesthood, I don't know, that would have been a problem for my wife. It would have been an awkward conversation. And so, so I think there are some things that are ruled out, and you've got to make sure that that if you're going to transition to something else, that it's going to fit with all the other commitments that you have. And you might be a natural born teacher, and it might be that you love this job, and it still might not be right for you.
Yeah.
But I guess that brings me to the second point, which is that for me, it was very important to do this as something that was clearly not retirement. I didn't want anyone thinking that, I was really essentially done working, but just I don't happen to like golf, and so then I wanted to appear at the Heights. That wasn't the idea. And I think I certainly work as hard, if not harder, at this job as I did it, in my law career. So that's something that you've got to be ready for. And I think if there's one other thing I could say, it's that the first year I did this, I did it part-time, still, and I would teach, and I would teach 3 periods here in the morning, and then I would head downtown to my law office, and I'd work there in the afternoon. And, I know there have been other Heights dads who have come and taught for a year. Wasn't for them, and they left. And that was the right thing to do for them, right?
Yeah.
And so if there's a way to try it out, and maybe you're trying it out in a CCD class, or maybe you're trying it out, in an adjunct role at a local college or something like that. But if there's a way for you to try it out and make sure that you're not overly romanticizing it. I mean, I think, people who've had good teachers are grateful and have an elevated idea of what it is. It's something that they would like to do. And, maybe that's the right call for you, and maybe it's not. But I would say if you possibly can, try it out first.
Yeah.
So.
No, that's good advice on the practical side, but also points to the fact that a lot of the names we carry into our, fourth, fifth, sixth decade of life, we still remember our third grade teacher or our fifth grade teacher, right? Ninth grade biology. Like there's a big impact, right? Impact measured over decades, not years. But I like that idea. I had forgotten that you were part-time when you first got here and then transitioned. So if you can do that sounds like about as comfortable as you can make an uncomfortable choice, right? Mm-hmm. What about you, Rob?
Yeah, I think if you're already a father or a parent, you already have and you are drawn to teaching, you'll be able to do it. I think I really do believe the fatherly skills. And if you're thinking about it going, oh, when I had that birthday party and I had 15 kids over, or how did I deal with that? Or could I deal with that all day long? Those are
they're not always eating that much sugar.
Exactly.
That's true.
That is
the
true.
Key, right?
But you get those, or you like coaching, and you're used to dealing with groups. Those may be things that you're like, you know what, this is worth a try. And it will be hard. I think that transition was humbling for me. And where I had a little bit of the rose-colored glasses, because I think I had the best students in the world as medical students who were the best students. And so it was different. And it was I had to do more work to keep their attention. But I can tell you those are skill sets you can develop too. So, it's not like you all of a sudden know this is your vocation and you're perfect at it. I have so much growth that I had last year, and I'm looking forward to even more growth, with these skill sets, because it's a difficult profession, and there's a great art with it. But I think if any of those things don't scare you away, then you can grow on them. And I will say I went from having horrible classroom management, I think, to really learning so many better tactics by the end of the year. That.
And a lot of that can't be. You can't read it in a book. You really have to have the students in front of you and think oh, that's what happens when I don't have a plan.
Right.
Or don't have enough of a plan. But
right.
Yeah, that's funny too. I'd never thought about the distinction of just how the further you get up closer to a career, the more ambitious your students are, the more motivated they are, and the more aware they are of the opportunity costs.
Right.
But our sixth graders, what else do they know? Right? They'd be I don't know. I sit at home on the couch doing nothing. That would be better than this.
Yeah.
And that's all they've got, right? Their imagination just ends at that point. So kind of convincing them that this is the best use of their time is a lot of that burden still does fall on us. But that's really awesome. Well, I want to thank you guys for your time today. I can give you guys some time for closing thoughts, but I think we kind of covered that. What do you guys, anybody got a last word of wisdom? Okay.
No, I think
we're
good.
Yeah. But yeah, thanks so much. It's both for coming on the podcast, but also for discerning in the teaching vocation, because I mentioned it in a talk I gave earlier at the Heights, but it is so cool to have, a diverse set of colleagues, but it is even cooler when we're not all lifelong teachers, right? Some of us are the new guys. I remember being the youngest teacher here, and then I remember definitely never going to be the youngest teacher here again, right? It happens to all of us as we age and figure out what am I good at, what am I not good at. But just the sheer skill set we have here and leaning on each other's experience has been really, really helpful. So I'm grateful to you guys for that as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Happy to be here.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.